Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to oped.tv. I think a lot of people who have not been in college for a good number of years or who never went to college have something less than a great understanding of what college life is like now. Are the humanities really going the way of payphones and toll booths? What's the primary reason to go to college? Is it simply to get a better job at better pay? And why does college cost so incredibly much these days? Is the quality of the education so much better than it was 30, 40, or 50 years ago? We'll tackle these issues and more with two terrific guests. Katina Rogers is the author of Putting the Humanities PhD to Work, Thriving in and Beyond the Classroom. Matthew Gold is Associate Professor of English and Digital Humanities at the CUNY Graduate Center, where he is advisor to the Provost for Digital Initiatives. Welcome and thanks for coming in. I appreciate it. So we keep reading and hearing that the humanities are basically in free fall, in such a decline. One, is this true? And two, why should just ordinary citizens, say in this tech-obsessed 21st century, why should they even care about the humanities? Katina, I'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, first of all. Working independently as a consultant, which gives me an opportunity to work with universities all across the country. So what I've been seeing in that capacity is that students are clamoring for the humanities, but they are suffering from a closure of avenues that are open to them. So instead of being able to pursue the majors that they want to pursue, teachers who are there and ready to teach the courses that they would like to take, they're finding program closures. They're hearing public rhetoric that tells them that the humanities are not a valuable pursuit for them. And they're finding themselves pushed both by the public rhetoric, the infrastructure around them, and sometimes by forces within their families, by people that they're close to, who are encouraging them to opt for something that seems to be more lucrative. The problem with that is that the careers that are open to people are changing all the time, and so trying to tailor one's education specifically to something that's going to earn you a living is something that is always going to put you on shifting terrain. And so students who might instead want to, dig deeply into critical thinking, to understand the world around them, to have a chance to understand history and literature and the things that really make us who we are instead finding themselves with a lack of opportunities available to them. I know that Matt's been teaching, and what I hear every time I talk to someone who's in the classroom is that students could not be happier to be there. And so I think that there's a misalignment between what we're hearing in popular media and what we're seeing in the classroom.
It wouldn't be reversed.
Right.
Matt, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree with Katina. I think that so many messages that students receive are that the STEM fields are what are most valuable and valued in society. And I think that the humanities give us narratives. They help us understand why we do what we do. But I also think that the humanities need to change a little bit. We can't teach humanities courses in the same way that we might have 100 years ago, 50 years ago. And I do think humanities faculty are changing and are doing lots of experimentation to connect students to the world around them, to connect the humanities to the environment, to technology, and helping students think about issues like the ethics of artificial intelligence or how the things that are happening in the world relate to their own personal stories. So the humanities, I think students find value in them, and there are countervailing trends. Places like Berkeley, even Pace University have seen trends of growth in the humanities majors. So it's not all a downward spiral.
If we put the humanities aside for a second, and because technology has become such an enormous factor in our society, can you give us a couple of ways in which technology, we're talking about how college life has changed over the past several decades. Mm-hmm. Give us a sense of a couple of ways in which technology has enhanced student learning at the college level and a couple of ways in which maybe it's hampered it.
Sure. I mean, I think technology, one of the major shifts is that it's moved us away from a kind of fact-based recall method of education where what one needs to do is to learn a set series of facts. And instead, what humanities faculty are thinking through is how can we teach students to reason, to argue, and to think to support their arguments with research. So technology is obviously bringing text to us in ways that we haven't had them available before. Previously, one might need to travel to a library to view its special collections. Now one can view, a handwritten manuscript by a poet like Walt Whitman through the web, and that there are so many more resources that are available, so many more texts are available. And students can also now do their work on their phones, on their tablets, on their computers. So I think technology has brought many benefits. Of course, there are also many concerns. Social media both brings the positive changes in that we are so much closer and can hear thoughts of celebrities and scholars that whom we might not have known before. But it also brings a lot of noise and distraction. And I think that's one of the most difficult things for students nowadays is learning how to focus and to get away from all the distraction of social media.
You know, I spent half a century as a reporter and a columnist, and I have no idea how we were able to cover stories.
Right.
I mean, it was typewriters and carbon paper and pay phones and no internet or whatever, but somehow we did it. I'm not sure how well we did it, but somehow we did it.
If I can add to that too,
Sure.
One of the things that I think is really interesting right now for humanities faculty in particular is that the ways that technology is changing is pushing instructors to think about what exactly is it about the subject matter that you teach that matters. If students can get a summary of a text through ChatGPT, if they can, pull up information easily at hand like that, if they can, have some of these generative AI tools at their disposal for translation, for writing even, then what does it mean to be teaching the humanities now? What kinds of literacies are we working to instill in students? And so in some ways, I think that has really been pushing the discipline to think critically about itself in a way that I think is really positive and healthy.
Right. So I'm going to get to the cost of college in a few moments, but Katina, you've talked about how financial support for the humanities and probably for higher education in general has declined, and it's declined substantially. And you've connected that to sort of a decline in support for government support for public services and goods in general. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think over the past few decades, we've seen an increasing privatization of what used to be public spaces and public goods. So that includes universities, public universities like CUNY, but also public parks, some of which, are now gated off. You have to be a resident in a certain building in order to access green space. Libraries, we're seeing even in New York City, we're seeing library hours be reduced, we're seeing access reduced, which pushes people into spaces that require resources. You need to go to a bookstore or you need to order something on Amazon. So I think that what we're seeing is just this retraction of a sense of what it means to invest in our collective community. And colleges are one of the spaces that are really taking a hit with that.
But I'm not sure everyone understands the importance of the support for public goods and services. So give us a short lecture here. Why is it important for us collectively, and that means in terms of tax dollars, for example, to support these goods and services?
Well, I think you just need to look at CUNY at the City University of New York, which is an incredible driver of social mobility. There are incredible statistics. 70% of CUNY undergraduates come from families making less than $30,000 a year in New York City. And CUNY enables students from these families to change their social and economic circumstances. It's an incredible social and intellectual space for students to grow and change. So there are the social reasons. There are also, I think, the personal reasons. College can and should be a time where students explore their interests, find new interests, learn about subjects that they might not have known about before, and grow and change.
There's amazing things happening on our college campuses. I mean, you've got brilliant students being taught by fabulous professors. The arts are flourishing on college campuses and so on. College athletics, I mean, I think that's a wonderful thing. I may not always be crazy about the overemphasis, but I mean, it's just great. So talk a little bit about what you think of as the greatness of American colleges and universities, and what happens to us as a society if we start missing the point of what's actually happening. I'll start with you, Katina.
Sure, that's such a great question. Some of the most promising things that I see are being pushed by students. The students who are coming in, who are hungry to find ways to connect what they're learning in the classroom with the communities that they care about, the commitments that they have outside of their educational spaces. And I think as a result of that, we're starting to see more and more college programs, and especially humanities programs, form long-lasting connections with community organizations in their area, with public K-12 elementary schools and middle schools and high schools in their area. And I think that those interlocking connections are one of the things that are incredibly beneficial to students and to faculty both as we think about what the possibilities for the humanities are. So the more that I think we're seeing these connections being made, not just what you're learning in the classroom, but what does that mean, even if you don't readily see a connection between Renaissance literature and how you're understanding, the kinds of vernacular language that you might be hearing in your neighborhood. Those connections can be found. And so I think about, as just by way of example, there's a program at the University of Iowa called the Humanities for the Public Good that's run out of the Obermann Center. It's actually coming to an end of its grant funding, but this program intentionally worked with students to have them connect with programs in Iowa City through internships, through research-based learning, and through mutual projects that were really deeply reciprocal, that benefited both the organization that was part of the partnership and that supported the kind of learning that the students were working to do. And those kinds of partnerships take a lot of time. But that's where I see a lot of promise, is through these interconnections.
Matt, if you were going to talk about the things that are first rate or that you really love about campus life in general in the United States, what comes to mind?
What comes to mind for me is that the image we tend to talk about college in the mainstream media really doesn't reflect the great majority of institutions in the country. Most colleges look more like CUNY than they do like Harvard. And I think often about the fact that City College of New York is often used in shows like Law and Order as a kind of stand-in for a Harvard campus. And I think City College is the real Harvard of the US. We have incredible populations of students who are coming in to urban campuses, to rural campuses, community colleges, and the great majority of college education happens in situations and spaces like that. And I think we don't pay enough attention to them.
Returning to something that Matt said earlier too, I think that there's this tension in the public rhetoric between the idea that colleges are this elitist space and the reality that they are this incredible engine of social mobility, especially when you're looking at public institutions like CUNY.
So I do want to talk about the cost of college. It's so expensive that now, many youngsters are coming out with debt that might take almost the better part of a lifetime or their adult lifetimes to pay off. And this, of course, has various impacts. I mean, it talks about the kind of work or career you might go into, when or if you can get married and start a family or buy that first home or whatever. Why is it so incredibly expensive? And if you were thinking in terms of the quality of the education, is it, as I asked in the introduction, that much better than it was 30, 40, 50 years ago? Matt, I'll start with you.
I think it goes back to what Katina mentioned earlier, which is a widespread disinvestment by our federal and state governments in higher education. I mean, that is, I think, the primary driver of college tuition expenses, that colleges more and more need to find ways to support their revenue. I also think, if, as many people say, budgets are reflective of our values, you mentioned sports earlier, we can look at how much funding colleges are putting into their athletic programs as opposed to their academic programs. I think we should spend some time thinking about our budgets, what values they reflect, and if we do in fact really value education, then it's time to support that education and not pass the costs on to students and families.
Katina?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, it really varies by state too. So CUNY is better off than many places in terms of the percentage of its operating budget that's funded by the city and the state. The University of Colorado, where I did my PhD, they're down to, I think, less than 5% of their budget being supported by state funds. So at that point, even going to a public institution is going to cost students quite a lot of money. So public disinvestment is one thing. I think the expansion of, a lot of times we hear that administration is one of the big costs. I think it's a bit more nuanced than that. I think that there's an expansion of kind of a managerial class in this effort to make universities run more like corporations that's quite distant from the instructional work of engaging with students, but that receives pretty substantial salaries. And so I think the expansion of that managerial class within universities is part of it. But I also think part of it is just an inflation of what the cost looks like, especially when you're talking about private institutions, that there's a perception that if a university costs a lot of money, that it's prestigious. And if a university has a high sticker price, they can then offer more aid to students, which also can raise them in the rankings of things like US News and World Report. So it does not have to be as expensive as it is. There's ways that we can be lobbying our elected officials to support the public universities, but private universities also need to be thinking about what some of the decisions are for their own infrastructure and management.
I would just say colleges are called upon these days to do so much more than they used to do. Everything from counseling, health services, dorms. There are so many services that colleges provide that just go beyond the classroom.
Yeah.
What are the trend lines telling us? Is this inflationary spiral just going to continue? Or are people trying to do some serious things about curbing costs? Do we have any idea?
I don't know.
I don't see the costs coming down anytime soon, personally.
I think about this for my own kids too.
Yeah.
I mean, they're in elementary school now, and I don't know what college is going to look like for them in 10 and 15 years when they go to school. I hope that this is not just an ever-increasing upward trend, but it's hard to say.
Right.
So college is more important now, I think, than it ever was in terms of establishing a middle-class standard of living in this country. When I was a kid, very often you didn't have to go to college. I mean, you could make a good life, without an undergraduate degree. That's changed, but at the same time, not every young man or woman is a good fit for college. College is not necessarily something that they want or that everybody needs. So how do you determine, and who should be determining who's a good fit for college? And societally, what should we be doing for those young people who don't get a college degree? Katina.
Sure. I think that part of what we're seeing is an erosion of the middle class overall. So it's not just that, there's a need for a college degree in order to get a middle class job, but those jobs are being more and more striated between upper class and lower class with really not as much room in the middle.
Right.
So that's a huge societal challenge, is thinking about what has happened to that body of middle-class work that has been the foundation of the United States for decades and decades. I think that students themselves should be the ones who are making the choices about their own pathways. I would love to see more permeability into and out of educational spaces. I think CUNY does that fairly well, but lowering the barriers of entry so that someone can come in, take a few classes, and then go back to a vocation that they've been pursuing. I think that our community colleges are one of the greatest assets of public education in the United States. And maybe there's something that our four-year institutions and our graduate institutions can learn from community colleges as far as those points of access and how to make it easier for students to enter and exit.
I think that one of the ways that's happened in recent years, especially since the pandemic, has been through online education. And that's been both a driver of access, that online education allows students to take a class part-time or even to take asynchronous classes. But there are also troubling trends there where many universities see online classes purely as a kind of cash cow, a way to sort of increase enrollment at a time when in-person enrollment might be dropping. I think all of this, and at the root of your question, is why is it important to go to college? What does it
Right.
matter? Why should we go to college? And I think the primary reason, at least for me, is to learn to think, to learn to consider ideas and the history of ideas, and learn to value and argue with voices from the past. So even for students who might not be going to college, I think there's a reason to explore, to read, to look at various texts, and to explore whatever might be relevant to their fields.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it important to carry learning to that level? Why is it important to get the education that's behind a PhD or doctorate level educations?
Mm-hmm.
What does that contribute to individuals, to families, and to societies?
Mm-hmm. There's something about the depth of a doctoral degree that is really unique. To be able to have the space and time to go so deep into an area of study over a period of years, hopefully funded by the institution, so you're not incurring debt along the way. It not only does it help a student to acquire just a great deal of subject expertise, but it's also an exercise in scoping a large project and understanding how to parse resources from a wide range of different materials and areas. If we can disentangle the sense that a PhD only prepares a student for one career pathway, which I have never thought is true, but still seems to be a pervasive sense that many come into the profession with. If we can disentangle that a little bit so that students can see the applicability of that critical thinking that they're bringing into all of these realms that really need someone who can help to probe those questions, I think it's good for the students and it's good for society as well.
Matt, you're nodding.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I think that doctoral education helps students work on their research. They gain a lot of in-depth knowledge, but I think that doctoral education also needs to change and has been changing. One of the things I've been seeing is a growth in interdisciplinary work, that where doctoral programs are asking their students, and students are really asking their doctoral programs to explore issues from multiple angles. And I think one of the results of that is that we see students emerging from a doctoral program in English and becoming developers or moving into nonprofit work. And I think it's opened up the career options for doctoral students in ways that very narrow doctoral education in the past might not have.
And to be clear on this, though, because it really is a double-edged sword, universities also need to be investing in themselves and hiring people into full-time faculty positions. Sure. I think at the same time that we're seeing, this incredible wealth of opportunities that students are going into outside the academy, we also want to see many of those students staying within the educational space, but there has to be a career waiting for them there. And right now, so many people are finding that all they can do is teach one course at a time at 6 different campuses to try and cobble together a living. And that's not good for universities, and it's not good for the next generation of students. So I think both things are true.
How did you get into this racket? What drew you to education as a profession?
What drew me to grad school and what drew me to education as a profession are maybe two different things, but I went to grad school without a strong sense of what the career possibilities even were. I didn't have people in my family who had gone through graduate school. I didn't have a lot of models to look to, but I had teachers who encouraged me as an undergraduate student to go further. I felt like I wasn't finished learning, and it was incredibly kind of mind-blowing to me that I could get a funded position to keep learning languages and literatures. So for me, it was, in retrospect, a little bit naive. I didn't know what was going to come of that career-wise, but the opportunity to keep learning felt amazing. As I went through that program and learned a little more about how the sausage was made and learned how much I didn't know, that's what really sparked my interest in working in education as a career, in helping to help others understand the hidden curriculum, help figure out what some of these infrastructure questions might be, how we can make universities a better place, not just for one student, but for all students.
Matt, when you were a youngster, did you think about becoming a professor? Did you think that you would be a professor?
I never thought I would make it, but I thought, the people I found most inspiring in my life, aside from my family, were my teachers. My English teacher, Dr. Mosenthal, my college teachers, Dr. Richardson. You know, these were people I looked up to and wanted to be like. For me, a doctoral program was always an aspiration once I learned that it was possible. And I went to the Graduate Center, the CUNY Graduate Center, for my doctorate, and in the process started teaching at Lehman College, at Baruch College, and going into CUNY classrooms inspired me to want to be the kind of person for my students who my teachers were for me.
Well, we're happy that both of you came into the profession. You've been great guests. We've been talking with Katina Rogers and Matthew Gold. I'm Bob Herbert. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.